Okay.
All right, we're recording. Hey, everybody, how's it going? This is Tim
Hey,
and
I just
Jordan.
wanted to,
And
yep.
yeah, go ahead.
So,
You
yeah,
you
we
started off, man.
we were talking yesterday, and I said, hey, we should really talk about this over Zoom live stream because this is stuff everybody needs to know. And been an article floating around a lot. It says, hey, Chase Bank is tightening up lending standards. They're requiring 20% down and a minimum credit score of 700. And Tim and I know that that's not every lender, but I thought it would be helpful if he could explain really how that works so everybody understands it better and can see that, hey, Chase Bank doesn't control the world, US Bank doesn't control the world. They're not all lenders are the same. So yeah, I thought it'd be great
Yeah,
for us to
yeah,
get on here and talk about that.
right. That's true. And so to understand this, you kind of got to know the bigger picture first, right? So all the guidelines for loans are set by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, FHA, VA, those agencies, right? And they set them so that they can get loans that are similar, so that when they go to sell those loans, they can package them up as similar loans, and then people will buy them, right? Because if they're all, if like one person can have a debt to income of 70 and another person has to be 40, that's not really the same loan, right? It's not the same risk profile. So they're trying to standardize them. So they set standardized guidelines. And when they do that, that's just the general guidelines. We call them the agency guidelines. Agency guidelines would be the minimum standard every loan has to hit. Doesn't matter who you are. So if you're Chase, you have to live by the agency guidelines. Wells Fargo, US Bank, Quicken, we don't get to go around those. Whatever that guideline is the final word. But inside of that, there's a whole nother web, and that's really what people are seeing here. And that's the differences between lenders. Those are called overlays. So it's kind of like if you took a template, a base, and you put a layer on top of it. That layer on top of it is where the banks differ. So if Fannie Mae, for example, says the minimum credit score is 620, Chase could say we're not doing loans at 620, we're going to do them at 700, which is recently actually one of the guidelines that they put out there. So that's obviously very, very restrictive. Any other bank could go down to 620. That they can't go below 620 because that is the agency guideline, but they can go down to 620. Chase is choosing to be more restrictive and have what's called an overlay, making their, in their eyes, their risk appetite isn't as big as others or as big as Fannie Mae. So they're limiting their exposure by creating that overlay. That's the general idea of what happens between lenders. And then how it's working in this case, to get really specific about Chase, is Chase, their CEO is not a big fan of their mortgage division or mortgages in general. Doesn't like a lot of things about it, including some of the government over regulations, and has been very critical of the government when it comes to how it treats mortgages, and has used excuses in the past when government steps in to back off. Like I don't remember exactly how many years ago it was now, but more than 2 years ago, Chase pulled out of FHA lending. I don't know if they ever went back in, but they completely pulled out when the government made a change and made them do something they didn't like. They said, fine, you're going to make us do that. We're not going to lend on FHA at all. And they completely cut out. And so they're known to be extremely conservative. They cherry pick the type of deals they want, and they don't do anything else. So in this case, all these memes you saw was, this is typical Chase. This isn't the industry. The industry has tightened its belt a little bit. There are some overlays that we're seeing that are becoming pretty much industry standard, not 100% standard, but close to it. And but for the most part, Chase is going to be out on its own. It's going to be a rebel, being more conservative than everyone else.
Sure. And the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac guidelines recently tightened up a little bit too, right? With credit score and debt to
Yeah,
income.
yeah. What we're seeing, what we're seeing is their actual guidelines. They did make it. Uh, what they're doing is they're making it require that we check more closely someone's employment, right?
Hmm.
Because they're worried about people being unemployed or furloughed.
Yep.
So there's some tightening in the quality control process there. They've actually made some things looser, believe it or not, meaning like they're more liberal on how they will treat the approval of a condo and also how they will treat appraisals. So, for example, I don't want anyone to mishear me here. It's not that they will do virtual appraisals and and appraisals where they don't enter the property in some circumstances. And this is Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are different, and they're also different from FHA and VA. So don't FHA tried to do this, but really it didn't work. But basically, there are situations where their appraisal will drive to the exterior of the property, but the interior pictures and other data will come from the person living in the property. So they could potentially email video and or pictures to the appraiser to complete the interior part of the appraisal. It's a case by case basis. It requires certain loan types and parameters. Like, for example, don't expect that on cash out. Don't expect that on investment properties. It really the safest deals is what they're doing that on.
Okay.
You may read that FHA tried to do the same thing, and they did, but they totally botched it. And frankly, right now it's not in practice. The appraiser that I talked to threw his hands up and said, "How are we supposed to do that in FHA? Like, it doesn't meet any of the guidelines. They have to allow it. They have to basically tell us what we can stop doing before it'll work." So maybe that'll happen in the future, but I think that FHA moves so slow on stuff like that I don't expect that to be a reality.
Yeah, we might be out of this. Do you think that some of these lenders are tightening their guidelines because of the forbearance that some of these CARES Acts have given?
100%. That is where we're seeing all the tightening. So it's that combined with it's the fear of people not making their payments. So again, looking at the big picture, keeping it simple. When you the reason why loans are cheap is because they're bought and sold kind of like stocks. They're bonds, but it's bought and sold like stocks on Wall Street, and that allows basically supply and demand, right? Yeah. If the demand is high, the rates will be low, right? Because the supply is the money going in, right? The investment rates go up when people don't invest as much money in mortgages. That's when rates go up. The higher rate attracts more investors again, right? And then consequently can bring the rates back down. So what you see with forbearance is now all of a sudden people don't want to buy mortgage bonds because they're not sure that people are going to be paying their mortgage payment, right? And that means no money. And the one thing about mortgage bonds is the reason why they're attractive is they're supposed to be safe. But when they're not safe, they're not a very good investment because they don't pay that well. They're not high margins anyway. They're not high return on investment. So when people stop paying, people don't want to get mortgage bonds. And so now investors, in order to make mortgage bonds more secure again, are trying to basically make them safer so that people want to invest in them.
Sure, absolutely. That makes sense.
Another thing you can think of is if you, I'll just use Chase as our example. If you have your mortgage with Chase and you don't pay Chase, they're required to pay that mortgage bond holder your payment, even though you didn't pay them. And they can do that in limited quantities, limited meaning like 1% of their portfolio. But when it gets to be several percent of their portfolio, it affects things. Where we're seeing this the most, currently FHA's forbearance rate as of a couple of days ago was 5.89% of the whole FHA portfolio is in forbearance. That's more than double what conventional is. So what we're seeing now is FHA and VA rates, because they're tied together, they use the same bond. Those are in flux, and frankly, no one wants to buy them. And those forbearances are making it harder for people to get good deals on FHA loans. You can get a low rate, you're going to pay very high fees to get it.
Okay. Yeah, I just thought it would be good for us to jump on here because obviously I'm no expert. I'm not a lender. You are. But I think a lot of people really don't understand how the whole process works, and they see stuff like these Chase is raising the requirements articles pop up and just think, oh, Chase is a big bank. All banks must be doing this. And it's going to be hard to get a loan now, and that's going to affect the housing market, which it absolutely would. If everybody raised the minimum down payment to 20% and the minimum credit score to 700 across the board, that would be a big deal. So if we see an article that says, hey, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac raise the minimum down payment to 20% and the minimum credit score to 700, that would make a big impact. I don't.
Right. And Chase actually, I don't remember all the details, so I don't want to speak specifically the exact details, but Chase made different guidelines for their customers versus the rest of the world. So they're actually
Oh,
not
really?
treating their customers the same way as they are, someone right off the street.
Sure.
So some of the things you saw don't apply to their own internal customers. And
Okay.
yeah, so it's a little bit of it's certainly a misleading, but they did definitely tighten up dramatically. If you're a U.S. bank customer and you want a mortgage through Chase, you're not going to get very good terms.
Okay. Playing favorites a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. I guess why not? In this market, they can, and if they
Yeah.
don't care about the mortgage revenue, then that's part of it. But it does bring up a good thing, and I kind of feel the need to mention this every single time. If you don't need to be in forbearance, we recommend that you don't choose that option. The more I'm hearing about it, the more I think that it's very dangerous to get into a forbearance agreement. We definitely know that not every lender is going to treat them the same, but that's part of the point. Is sometimes you're going to hear one thing on the phone, but the actual contracts can be different. And if you're not reading the contract, it could be better or worse. I'm hearing both ways, meaning that, like, for example, I know the servicer, but I don't want to mention them by name because I don't want to throw them under the bus. But if you call their call center, the person will tell you that they're going to report negatively to the credit reports. But if you read their contract, it will say that they won't. Well, the contract's the real thing, right? Like, whatever they tell you is wrong. But because of that inconsistency, I'm very concerned that people are going to call up, they're going to get the information, they're going to make their decision, but they're not going to read the contract they get. And so, terribly important that you take this very seriously if you go in forbearance, and that you and I would actually make the offer that no matter who you're with, no matter who your mortgage person is, if you want to send me your contract so I can help you go through it and make sure you understand what's going on. I read this stuff all the time. I'd be happy to help on that, regardless of whether I'm your loan officer or not, because I just think it's that important to figure out what's going on. And if you want unbiased opinion, there's been a website created called Forebearancereport.com, and it lists the lenders. You can click on their link and it will tell you their in writing policies. So super important to go to that site if you're thinking about forbearance.
Yeah, there's always strings attached, so it's good to know the strings.
Yeah, I'll put the link in the comments below this post so that people have it.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks, Tim. I really appreciate your time, man.
Yeah.
Valuable information for everybody. Again, read the fine print, look into things a little deeper than just reading an article on the internet, because it's not the most accurate information you can get.
Right. Yeah, absolutely, for sure. All right, well, I think that's probably good for today. And let's, if people have needs, questions, feel free to, put a comment down below and take Jordan and I, and we'd be happy to help be a resource for you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, man. You have a great day.
Yep. Thanks. Take it easy.
Yep. Bye.